Well, today I am trying something a little bit different, something I've never done before, which is brewing. And because that's kind of a scary, finicky thing, well, it's scary because there can be explosions. I'll talk about that more a little bit later. I decided to go on the easy version of brewing. I love beer, I love craft beer, but I wanted to start with ginger beer because that seems a little bit more easy and straightforward and something that you can do with normal everyday equipment. So this was inspired mainly by the fact that I had a really good ginger beer recently that I found in my local craft beer store. So I said to myself, you can make something like this if you learn how to brew stuff. So this video is going to be the trials and tribulations of trying to brew ginger beer, learning about fermentation, learning all the steps and doing all the research, and hopefully giving you some tips and tricks about how maybe it will be easier for you trying. So the first step for me in any kitchen adventure project has always been to do the research, from the macarons to the sourdough to now ginger beer. There are so many different methods people have come up to do things that seems relatively straightforward. So my first step is always figuring out what other people have done and seeing which parts make sense to me as somebody who is experienced in the kitchen, knows a bit about science, and is ready to experiment. So the first thing I decided was that I definitely wanted to make an alcoholic ginger beer, just because that's my preference. But I also don't understand how you make a non-alcoholic ginger beer if it is actually fermented, because alcohol is a byproduct of fermentation. So keep it in mind if you do have any sensitivities about alcohol. The one I am making is definitely alcoholic, and I think most recipes will give you even just a mildly alcoholic ginger beer. So if that's something that worries you, just keep that in mind. And from there, I learned there were two main methods people use to make ginger beer, and one of them is the cheats version, which I never go the cheaters route, but it's basically making a sweetened ginger syrup that has all kinds of lime and sugar and ginger and all that good stuff in a very concentrated syrup, putting that with carbonated water, and then if you want it to be boozy, you add booze to it. So that just seems kind of like a ginger ale or just something you get in the store. So if you are pressed for time, because ginger beer does take a while to make, you can try that out. I haven't tried it myself, but I'm sure it will give you something that resembles a gingery beverage. But the second method is, as I've mentioned, fermenting your own ginger bug and then carbonating that somehow. So I'm going to talk about the second method, you making this ginger bug and then going forward with that. Now, within making ginger bugs, there were a variety of methodologies. There were people who took a really long time to brew their ginger beer. There are people who did it in a relatively short period. There are people that used a lot of expensive equipment. There's people that used some inexpensive equipment. So I, in my methodology, tried to balance a lot of that and make something that seemed pretty straightforward, that anybody could do, but also was authentic, did take a little while, but gave me a really good, gingery, delicious ginger beer. Those were my goals, and I think I accomplished them, but we'll see as we go through. So because of those goals, my process was basically to ferment a ginger bug, a very concentrated ginger bug with lots of flavor, lots of kick, and then do a secondary fermentation to actually get the carbonation in it. So it was a two-step process. Took me probably 2.5 weeks, but I think the product I got from it was very good, although I do have some caveats at the end that you should pay attention to, because it was an interesting learning process. So let's start with the ingredients that I chose to use. First and foremost, this is ginger beer, so you need ginger. I got about 2.5 pounds of ginger, and I just grated that up in my food processor. I took some of the peel off of it, left some of it on. I didn't think it mattered that much because what is the, well, I guess it could have made it bitter or something. It did not end up making it bitter. So if you don't want to peel your ginger, just wash it. It seemed easier to me. I don't know. Maybe that was wrong. Let me know if it is wrong. Next, you need some sort of acid and some flavor to it. So limes, one of my favorite fruits, one of my most favorite citruses. I used about 6 limes, the juice of 6 limes. Next, to aid in the fermentation, I used champagne yeast, and I'll have a link to the type that I used in the description box. It's just a standard winemaking, beer making thing that you could find on Amazon, and the stuff I got was relatively inexpensive, and I have like 7 packs left over, so I guess I could make ginger beer or some other champagne next. Maybe that's what's next. So next is sugar, and I used probably 2 to 2.5 cups of sugar. It really depends on how long you ferment. You'll see as I talk about the process why I'm a little bit unsure about how much I actually use. Next is an interesting ingredient that I found when I was perusing the research. Food52.com had a really good recipe for ginger beer, and they said if you want it to have extra kick, try adding a jalapeno to the mix. So I added just 1 jalapeno. Their recipe was a lot smaller than mine, so I used 1 jalapeno so it wasn't too kicky, but still had a little bit of a kick besides the ginger. And finally, you need filtered water. I used 10 cups. And the ratios that I used, I mainly made this really huge batch because I was like, oh, I love ginger beer. I want so much ginger beer. And I had this really giant container for the ginger beer brewing process. So I was like, let me fill it up as much as possible. I left some room in it because I didn't want it to go completely to the top and then overflow when it was, fermenting. So that was something that I'll talk about at the end, whether if that was a good idea or not. So on to the process that I used. And so as I mentioned before, this is a 2-stage process. So we'll start with stage 1, and it is pretty simple. If you can stir and pour stuff, you can do stage 1. So stage 1 is you put about half the ginger in, half a cup of sugar, all of the water, all of the lime juice, and the jalapeno, and the champagne yeast in a big container, and you stir it all together so it's really well mixed. And then you basically let it sit there for 2 weeks. But during those 2 weeks, you have a couple of babysitting tasks for it. You want to stir it every single day to make sure that the ginger is percolating and, infusing everything evenly. Every other day, you want to add about a 1/4 cup of sugar to the mixture. And the reason you're adding sugar is so that the yeast has something to eat. So when in the end, you're not going to have this like super sugary sweet ginger beer, because this is the science part of it. The yeast eats all the sugar and it turns it into alcohol, and it turns it into carbon dioxide. And that is why we'll have alcohol, and eventually why we'll have carbonation in this. The other thing you want to do is halfway through the process, about a week in, you want to add the other half of the ginger that you have, just to, re-infuse, get some fresh ginger flavor into there, and just make sure that it is a really concentrated, delicious ginger bug at the end. So during the process, you'll know that the whole thing is working and fermenting when you see little bubbles coming all around the jar, and you see that they're naturally occurring bubbles. They're not because you've stirred it or anything. They're just there, and they are the little carbon dioxide bubbles that the yeast is producing. So that's how you know that fermentation is happening. And once that starts happening, I believe that you can start bottling it then, but I waited the full 2 weeks because I really wanted to have an intense ginger flavor in my ginger beer and make sure that the alcohol content wasn't overwhelming, but it was still discernible, because, it's a ginger beer. It should have that kick and that bite to it. But once you know it's ready to be bottled, the bottling process is stage 2, and it is just as straightforward as stage 1. So the 2 things you need for stage 2, the bottling, is 1, you need your ginger bug, and 2, you need sweetened water. And this is because we are doing a secondary fermentation and the yeast needs something to eat when it's in the bottle. So it needs some more sugar. So when I sweetened the water, for about a liter of water, I put in 2-3 tablespoons of sugar. It was sweet to the taste, but it wasn't sickly sweet. You don't want to put too much sugar in because that'll give it too much food and it'll be too prolific and everything could explode if you have too much carbonation in your beverage. So the ratios I used, I had a 1 liter size water bottle, and in that I put about 1.5 cups of the ginger bug, and then I put about 2 cups of purified water that was sweetened. And I wanted to make sure I left a little bit of room so that it wasn't filled to the top, so that the carbonation, the CO2 that was released, had somewhere to go and it wouldn't explode right away. And then once I had all these bottles filled, so it only took 2 to 3 days for the actual carbonation to occur, and I think that's because I let it ferment so long that it already had a lot of momentum going into the carbonation phase. So yeah, after a couple days, I noticed that they were all rock hard, and I released one and it actually had bubbles come out as if it was like a soda from the store or beer. And I have a cat here, guys. She is come outside, a little old creature who I haven't shown in videos recently because all she does is sit inside all day because she's so old. But she, I guess, came out today to annoy me while I shot a video. Isn't that exciting? Alright, maybe we should leave me alone now. But yeah, it was carbonated like it was a soda from the store, which was very exciting. So I bottled about 9 bottles and had tons of ginger bug left over. So that's something to know, that this makes, I don't know, 20 bottles of stuff. I don't know. It was a lot. So I had those 9 bottles, but I don't have them anymore because I drank them relatively quickly out of fear and because they were also very tasty. But let me give you my caveats about what I think you should do if you are doing this project yourself, and maybe you won't fall victim to the having an overwhelming amount of possibly exploding ginger beer syndrome that I had. So first of all, don't make so much ginger bug or so many bottles of ginger beer because you'll have to drink them very quickly because they don't keep. I mean, technically, I believe you could I've put them in the fridge and they keep in the fridge, but I was in constant fear that everything was going to explode because after the 3 days, I went back in and I opened one of the bottles and the cap shot off and the thing exploded all over me, and I was freaked out because I had to open 8 more and was hoping that that was not going to happen again. And I ended up opening them very slowly, and only one other one sort of exploded, but I caught it with my hand. So I'm a superhero in real life, didn't you know? But I think this was a combination of maybe filling them a little bit too much, adding a little bit too much sugar. So when I told you my ratios, I did bump them back a little so that you wouldn't be as foolhardy as me. But I also think the bottles I used were crappy bottles because I just used pretty thin plastic water bottles that were not substantial enough to deal with the pressure that they were under. It was a little bit nerve-wracking having them all around because I was afraid they were going to explode on their own, so I made sure we drank them all and put some in the fridge. But I think they tasted best when they were at that 3, 4, 5 day mark after bottling them, because after that they became a little bit too alcoholic and a little bitter from not having as much sugar in them, and I didn't like the flavor as much. So my main caveat is make a smaller batch. You might not need to make a smaller batch of the ginger bug, though I would recommend, because it is a lot of ginger beer to go through, even if you're going through it, you know, like a couple months. I would definitely, you know, bump down the amount that you actually make, because it just, I love ginger beer, but I've had a lot of ginger beer recently and I'm a little bit over it. But it tasted so good when I started. So you can make less ginger bug, but I also definitely recommend bottling fewer bottles at a time so that you can go through them within that few day window when they are best. But if you do need to keep them, if you put them in the fridge, the yeast calms down, does not work as quickly, sort of goes into hibernation, and it will not explode as readily. So that's what I did with some of them so that I wouldn't have explosions in my dining room. The other thing you need to remember to do is if you are keeping them for any period of time, you have to check them all the time to make sure that you release the CO2 and it doesn't explode. So I think probably like twice a day, I was going in and like slowly releasing it. And you don't want to take the cap completely off because I think it'll let bacteria and microbes in or something, but don't take the cap off. Just release it a little bit at a time and you'll see that it'll fizz out. The carbonation will come out, and just let it release out of the bottle and then tighten it up again and you're good to go for maybe another 12 hours or something like that. But it was a scary time in my house while I was trying to make sure that the ginger beer did not explode. Next tip is definitely do not put too much sugar in, because if you put a lot of sugar in, it is just fuel for the fire or fuel for the explosion. That having a ton of sugar in your ginger beer is what causes the yeast, as I said, to make that extra carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide needs to go somewhere, and if the pressure builds up too much, explosion time. Also, do not recommend to give these as gifts, because you don't want to give people like basically a bomb ready to explode. Unless, I'm sure there is a way to actually bottle ginger beer, because I have had bottled ginger beer and canned ginger beer that makes it safe. And I mean, regular beer doesn't explode all the time and people keep it. So unless you know how to bottle things, which maybe I'll do that experiment at some point in the future, I don't recommend this as a gift. Just, have people over, open a bottle and share your ginger beer, because it is very tasty. And if you do want to make sure that they are sweeter, but you don't want to add the extra sugar to the equation, there are non-fermentable sugars out there like xylitol or something like that. Just look up non-fermentable sugars. I think they taste really gross, so I wouldn't use them, but people do use them in making ginger beer to make sure that they're sweeter. So that is a possibility. So those are my tips for right now from what I've learned. I can tell you that I got a very nice product from this adventure, and I would recommend you trying it, though it is not for the faint of heart because they can explode. But I think some of my tips will help you make that less likely. So hopefully that'll work for you. Right now, I'm going to cut this video and I am going to go, and because I want a product to show you, not just these clips of me making the product, not me just talking about it. I want this product to show you. I am going to go back into my kitchen. I have, as I said, leftover ginger bug, and I am going to go in and I'm going to try and carbonate it within a couple of days, and hopefully have a finished product to show you right now. Well, I am back, and it is a few days later than I had hoped it would be, because it took that long for this particular ginger beer to carbonate. It is now super hard, and I've got a nice glass with some ice and some lime. I'm going to attempt to open this bottle without having it explode. So here we go. And then let me do maybe a close-up of the ginger beer itself. Okay, here we go. Oh, you can hear the hiss. You can see the bubbles. Oh, look, it's definitely carbonated. I'm just going really slowly so it doesn't get too scary. It still feels very hard. Oh, there we go. There's some more. I think it's pretty much open. There we go. Look at that. Can you hear it? Now let's pour. There we go. Ginger beer. Now let's see if it still tastes good, this being the second batch. It still tastes the same. It might be a little bit more alcoholic, but I say thumbs up. So those are our adventures with ginger beer. I hope you enjoyed them, and I hope you come back for some more adventures here on this channel. Thanks for watching. Bye!